The sound of concrete cracking echoed through Maple Street as the excavator's steel teeth bit into what used to be Tom's dream pool. Karen Mitchell stood at her pristine fence line, arms crossed, victory gleaming in her eyes, till she saw the massive flagpole truck backing into his yard. The 30-foot American flag that would soon tower over her million-dollar mansion wasn't just a symbol of patriotism. It was a declaration of war. And Karen had no idea that her eyesore complaint was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. Tom Brennan had always believed in the American dream of minding your own damn business. For 15 years, he'd lived quietly at 847 Maple Street, maintaining his modest two-story colonial with the dedication of a man who understood that a home wasn't just shelter, it was sanctuary. His front lawn stayed green, his driveway stayed clean, and his trash cans never lingered on the curb past pickup day. The pool had been his one indulgence, not the kind of ostentatious infinity pool that screamed new money, but a simple above-ground circle of blue happiness, where his kids used to splash away summer afternoons before college claimed them, where his late wife Sarah had floated on her back, reading paperback mysteries while the sun painted freckles across her shoulders, where Tom still went some evenings just to sit on the deck he'd built with his own hands and remember what contentment felt like. The pool wasn't hurting anyone. It sat in his backyard, visible only to those who deliberately looked over his 6-foot privacy fence. The filter hummed quietly, the water stayed crystal clear, and Tom had even planted a ring of hydrangeas around its base, last spring Sarah's favorite flowers. But apparently, Karen Mitchell had been looking, and Karen Mitchell had opinions. Tom first learned this on a Tuesday morning in late June when he found the certified letter wedged into his screen door like a legal dagger. Read Maple Street Homeowners Association, which was news to Tom, since Maple Street had never had a homeowners association in the decade and a half he'd lived there. Inside, laser-printed on cream-colored letterhead that probably cost more than Tom's monthly water bill, was a formal complaint alleging that his unsightly above-ground swimming pool constitutes a neighborhood eyesore and violates community aesthetic standards. Tom read it twice, then walked to his kitchen window and stared out at the pool where a cardinal was drinking from the skimmer basket. Community aesthetic standards, he muttered to his coffee mug. The hell does that even mean? The letter was signed by Karen Mitchell, newly elected president of the Maple Street Homeowners Association, with a CC to someone named Bradford Huntington III-esque, because of course Karen had a lawyer with Roman numerals in his name. Tom had met Karen exactly once, 3 months ago, when she'd moved into the massive colonial that had been under construction for 2 years at the end of the street. The house was a monument to suburban excess, 4,000 square feet of beige, siding and black shutters with a circular driveway, professional landscaping, and a 3-car garage that was bigger than some people's entire homes. Karen herself was exactly what Tom had expected. Blonde highlights maintained with religious devotion, athleisure wear that cost more than most people's rent, and the kind of smile that suggested she was always calculating something behind her perfectly whitened teeth. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Tom had said when she'd introduced herself, offering a handshake and the kind of genuine warmth that came naturally to a man who'd spent 30 years teaching high school shop class. "Oh, how wonderful," Karen had replied, her voice pitched at that particular frequency that suggested she was performing happiness rather than feeling it. "I just know we're going to be the best of friends. I have so many ideas for improving our little community." The emphasis on improving should have been Tom's first warning. Now, staring at her letter of complaint, Tom felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the slow burn of righteous anger. Not the explosive kind that made men do stupid things, but the steady, methodical kind that made them do effective things. He walked outside to his pool, where the morning sun was turning the water into liquid sapphire. The hydrangeas were in full bloom, heavy purple and pink clusters that Sarah would have loved. A pair of blue jays had built a nest in the oak tree that shaded the shallow end, and he could hear their chicks chirping for breakfast. Eyesore, right? Tom pulled out his phone and dialed the number at the bottom of Karen's official letterhead. Maple Street Homeowners Association. Answered a voice that could have been Karen's sister, same pitched enthusiasm, same underlying steel. "This is Bethany speaking. How may I help you maintain our community standards today?" "This is Tom Brennan at 847 Maple Street," Tom said. I received a complaint about my pool, and I'd like to speak with Ms. Mitchell. Oh, Mr. Brennan. Yes, Karen mentioned you might be calling. I'm afraid she's in a meeting with our landscaping committee right now, but I can certainly take a message. When did Maple Street get a homeowners association? Tom asked. I've lived here 15 years, and this is the first I'm hearing about it. Well, Bethany's voice took on the patient tone usually reserved for children and the elderly. The association was formally established last month to protect property values and maintain quality of life that makes our neighborhood so special. Surely you want what's best for the community. What I want, Tom said, is to know who gave Karen Mitchell the authority to tell me what I can and can't do with my own backyard. Mr. Brennan, I can hear that you're upset, but the bylaws are quite clear about structures that negatively impact neighborhood aesthetics. Perhaps you'd like to review our community guidelines. I'd be happy to email them to you. Tom looked at his pool again, then at the Mitchell mansion visible through the trees. Karen's backyard featured a gazebo the size of a small restaurant, a fire pit that belonged in a resort, and what appeared to be a putting green. Let me ask you something, Bethany, Tom said. How many people are in this homeowners association? A pause. Well, we're still in our organizational phase, but we have several very committed members who share a vision for how many people. Another pause. Karen can better answer specific questions about membership. Would you like me to schedule you for a callback? Tom hung up. He spent the rest of the morning researching homeowners associations, municipal codes, and property rights. What he found was enlightening. Karen's newly minted HOA had exactly 0 legal authority over his property unless he'd signed a covenant agreement, which he hadn't, because no one had ever asked him to. The complaint was nothing more than expensive stationery and empty threats. But Tom had been teaching teenagers for 3 decades. He knew the difference between someone testing boundaries and someone planning an assault. Karen Mitchell wasn't just complaining about his pool. She was establishing dominance, marking territory, sending a message to the entire neighborhood about who was in charge. Now, Tom made himself a sandwich and sat on his pool deck. Thinking about Sarah, she'd always said that bullies only understood one language: consequences. Not anger, not arguments, but clear, immediate, undeniable consequences for their actions. What would you do, sweetheart? He asked the empty chair where she used to sit. The answer came to him as he watched the blue jays feeding their chicks. Sarah would have smiled that particular smile she reserved for moments when someone had seriously underestimated her husband. The smile that said, "Oh, honey, you have no idea what you just started." Tom finished his sandwich, pulled out his phone, and made 3 calls. The first was to Precision Pool Removal, a company that could have his above-ground pool dismantled and hauled away by the end of the week. The second was to the City Planning Office, where he learned some very interesting facts about flagpoles, property rights, and the specific municipal codes governing residential flag displays. The third was to American Pride Flagpole Company, where he placed an order that made the customer service representative pause and ask him to repeat himself twice. "Yes, sir," Tom confirmed. 30 feet, professional installation, American flag, marine-grade nylon, LED spotlight for nighttime display. How soon can you get it up? We can have a crew out Monday morning if you've got your permits in order. I'll have them by Friday, Tom said. He was still sitting by his pool when Karen Mitchell's silver BMW pulled into his driveway 2 hours later. She emerged wearing tennis whites and an expression that suggested she'd come to collect an overdue debt. Tom met her at his front door, still holding his coffee mug. "Mr. Brennan," Karen said, her smile sharp as a scalpel, "I understand you called our office today. I wanted to clear up any confusion about the pool situation." "No confusion," Tom replied. "You think my pool is an eyesore." Message received. Karen's smile widened. "I'm so glad you understand. Of course, we're reasonable people. If you'd prefer to replace it with something more ... appropriate, I'm sure we could work together. I have some lovely landscaping ideas that would really complement your property value." "Actually," Tom said, "I've already made arrangements to have the pool removed." The victory in Karen's eyes was immediate and blazing. "Oh, how wonderful. I knew you'd see reason when this weekend. Perfect." And what? The crane truck rumbling down Maple Street at 7:30 a.m. sounded like freedom with a diesel engine. Tom watched from his kitchen window as neighbors emerged from their houses like prairie dogs, coffee mugs in hand, drawn by the industrial symphony of hydraulics and steel. Karen Mitchell's BMW wasn't in her driveway. According to Bethany from the Homeowners Association, Karen had a standing Monday morning Pilates class at the country club. Tom had timed this perfectly. "Morning, Mr. Brennan," called Jake Morrison, the American Pride crew chief, a barrel-chested man whose forearms were decorated with an eagle tattoo and what looked like a purple heart. "Beautiful day to raise Old Glory." "Couldn't agree more," Tom replied, stepping outside to shake hands with the crew. 3 men, all veterans by the look of them, all wearing company shirts, with "proudly serving those who served" embroidered beneath the company logo. 30 feet, marine-grade hardware, LED lighting system, Jake recited, consulting his clipboard. "You sure about the height? That's going to be visible from 3 blocks away." "That's the point," Tom said. Jake grinned. "I like your style. Let's get this bird in the air." By 8 a.m., half the neighborhood had gathered. Mrs. Chen from across the street brought a thermos of coffee for the crew. The Hendersons from 2 doors down stood on their front porch, Bill still in his bathrobe, both of them grinning like they were watching the 4th of July parade. Tom called out Frank Delacroix, the retired postal worker from the corner house. "That's going to be some pull." "Regulation height for residential flag display," Tom replied. Checked the city codes twice. The concrete truck arrived at H15, followed by the inspector who'd expedited Tom's permit application after learning he was a veteran's widower. Sarah's first husband had died in Afghanistan before Tom ever met her, and the inspector's own son was currently deployed in Kuwait. "Looks good, Mr. Brennan," the inspector said, signing off on the foundation specs. "Your wife would be proud." Tom's throat tightened. Yes, sir, she would. The pole itself was a work of art, 30 feet of powder-coated steel that gleamed like polished silver in the morning sun. Not some cheap aluminum hollow post, but a proper flagpole with a 25-year warranty and hardware rated for hurricane-force winds. The American flag Tom had ordered was proportional to the pole's height, 8 feet by 12 feet of marine-grade nylon with embroidered stars and sewn stripes. When unfurled, it would be visible from the county road. "Jesus," Tom breathed. Bill Henderson, watching the crane position the pole over its concrete foundation. "That's not a flagpole, that's a statement." "Sometimes statements need to be made," Tom replied. At 9:15, Karen Mitchell's BMW turned onto Maple Street and promptly slammed on the brakes. Tom watched through the crowd as Karen sat in her car, staring at the 30-foot steel pole rising from the exact spot where his pool used to be. Her mouth was moving, probably working through a vocabulary that her country club friends would find shocking. She parked in her driveway with the jerky precision of someone barely controlling their temper, then marched across the street like she was leading a cavalry charge. "Mr. Brennan," Karen's voice could have shattered crystal. What is the meaning? Of this, the work crew paused their activities. The neighbors stopped their conversations. Even the birds seemed to quiet down. Tom turned to face her with the calm expression he'd perfected during 30 years of dealing with angry parents. At school board meetings, "Morning, Karen, just exercising my constitutional rights." "Constitutional rights?" Karen's voice climbed an octave. "This is residential neighborhood, not a military base." "It's a flagpole," Tom said, "for the American flag." "I believe you." "Mentioned wanting something more appropriate than my pool." Jake Morrison cleared his throat. "MAAM, if a May residential flag display is protected under federal law. Supreme Court ruling, Texas v. Johnson, 1989, can't be restricted by local ordinances or homeowner associations." Karen whirled on him, "And you are?" "Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, retired, United States Marine Corps." Jake's voice carried the kind of authority that made generals pay attention. "Been installing flagpoles for 12 years. This is one of the finest installations I've ever done." "I don't care if you're General Patton," Karen snapped. This monstrosity is going to destroy property values. It's going to loom over my house like some kind of communist watchtower." The silence that followed was so complete, Tom could hear a lawnmower running 6 blocks away. Bill Henderson started laughing. First a low chuckle that built into a full belly laugh. Mrs. Chen joined in, then Frank Delacroix, then the Henderson kids who'd come outside to watch the show. "Communist watchtower," Frank repeated, wiping his eyes. "Lady, that's the American flag." Karen's face flushed red. "I know what it is, but the size. The placement, this is clearly harassment. I'm calling my attorney." "Good luck with that," said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Pete Rodriguez, the city planning director, walking up the sidewalk with a folder under his arm. Tom had coached Pete's son in Little League 15 years ago, back when Pete was just starting out as a junior clerk. Tom nodded. "Everything looked good?" "Perfect installation," Pete confirmed, then addressed Karen directly. "Ma'am, I understand you have concerns, but this flagpole meets all municipal requirements. Height, setbacks, foundation, specs, everything's by the book. There have to be restrictions," Karen insisted. "Noise ordinances, visual pollution, something." "Not for flag display," Pete replied. "Federal law supersedes local codes. Mr. Brennan could put up a 50-foot pole if he wanted, long as it meets structural requirements." Karen looked like she'd been slapped 50 feet. Tom filed that information away for future reference. "Furthermore," Pete continued, "the planning office has been getting calls all morning from neighbors expressing support for Mr. Brennan's patriotic display." "Beautiful work, Tom." Jake Morrison stepped forward with the flag, still folded in its ceremonial triangle. "Ready for the raising, Mr. Brennan?" Tom accepted the flag with both hands, feeling its weight. Sarah had always insisted they fly a flag on Memorial Day and Veterans Day in honor of her first husband. She would have loved this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake announced, "please stand for the raising of the colors." The entire crowd came to attention. Frank Delacroix and Pete Rodriguez placed their hands over their hearts. Jake Morrison and his crew snapped to attention with military precision. Even Karen Mitchell, caught off guard by the sudden solemnity, stood silent as Tom attached the flag to the halyards. The flag climbed the pole slowly, ceremonially, catching the morning breeze as it rose. When it reached the top and unfurled completely, the sight took Tom's breath away. 8 feet by 12 feet of red, white, and blue, snapping proudly in the wind 30 feet above Maple Street. The crowd erupted in applause. Someone whistled. Mrs. Chen actually cheered. Tom looked at Karen, who was staring up at the flag with an expression somewhere between horror and disbelief. "You wanted something more appropriate than my pool," Tom said quietly, so only she could hear. "How's this?" Karen's voice came out, as barely a whisper. "You can't be serious." "As a heart attack," Tom replied, and Karen, "The lighting system comes on at sunset. LED spotlights rated for 24/7 operation. That flag's going to be visible all night, every night, for the next 25 years. For the first time since Tom had known her, Karen Mitchell was speechless. "Any other improvements you'd like to suggest?" Tom asked. Karen turned and walked back to her house without another word, her perfect posture finally showing cracks. As the crowd dispersed and the work crew finished their cleanup, Frank Delacroix approached Tom with a thoughtful expression. "Tom," Frank said, "I've lived on this street for 40 years. Never seen anything quite like what just happened here." "Like what?" Frank grinned. "Like someone finally figuring out how to fight back without throwing a punch. That woman tried to push around the wrong guy." Tom looked up at his flag, snapping proudly in the breeze. "She wanted to improve the neighborhood. I just gave her what she asked for." But as Frank walked away, Tom noticed something else. Karen's upstairs window, where a figure stood silhouetted against the glass, looking down at his yard. Even from this distance, Tom could feel the intensity of her stare. Karen Mitchell wasn't defeated. She was calculating, and Tom had a feeling the war was just beginning. That evening, as the LED lights kicked on and his flag became a beacon visible for miles, Tom received the first of what would become a daily flood of phone calls from neighbors, friends, and complete strangers expressing their support for his patriotic display. But he also received one other call from Bradford Huntington 3-esque, informing him that the Maple Street Homeowners Association was exploring all available legal remedies for what they termed an aggressive violation of community standards. Tom smiled as he hung up the phone. Let them explore. Tomorrow, he had an appointment with his own attorney, a woman who specialized in property rights and had a particular dislike for frivolous lawsuits. Karen Mitchell wanted to play lawyer. Games Tom was about to show her what 30 years of dealing with entitled parents had taught him about fighting battles. He couldn't afford to lose. Diana Reeves had built her reputation on two things: an encyclopedic knowledge of property law and an absolute intolerance for bullies. When Tom Brennan walked into her downtown office Tuesday morning, carrying a folder thick with Karen Mitchell's increasingly desperate correspondence, Diana recognized the look in his eyes, the quiet determination of a man who'd been pushed exactly one step too far. 30 feet, Diana said, reviewing the flagpole specifications with obvious appreciation. Marine-grade hardware, LED lighting, 25-year warranty. Mr. Brennan, you don't do anything halfway, do you? Sarah always said if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right, Tom replied. Diana had handled Sarah's estate planning years ago, back when cancer was just a word in someone else's vocabulary. She remembered the couple's quiet dignity, their fierce devotion to each other, and Sarah's wicked sense of humor about what she called neighborhood politics. Sarah would have loved this, Diana said, scanning Karen's latest legal threat. This Bradford Huntington character is throwing around a lot of fancy language, but it's all smoke. Federal flag protection laws are ironclad. That's what I figured, Tom said, but I wanted to be sure. Diana leaned back in her chair, studying the correspondence more carefully. Tom, this woman isn't just angry about your flagpole. She's building a case for something bigger. Look at the pattern noise complaints, aesthetic violations, property value concerns. She's trying to establish a paper trail. For what? A nuisance lawsuit, maybe harassment charges. She's documenting everything, creating a narrative where you're the aggressor and she's the victim. Tom's jaw tightened. All I did was put up a flagpole. I know that. But Karen Mitchell is building a story where your flagpole is just the latest escalation in a campaign of intimidation. Diana tapped the papers with her pen. The question is, what's her endgame? The answer came sooner than either of them expected. Wednesday morning, Tom woke to find a Channel 7 news van parked in front of Karen's house and a perfectly coiffed reporter interviewing Karen in her front yard. Through his kitchen window, Tom watched Karen gesturing dramatically toward his flagpole. While speaking with practiced outrage into the microphone, his phone rang. Tom, it's Diana. Are you watching Channel 7? I'm looking at it right now. Don't say anything to anyone. Media, neighbors, nobody. Karen just went nuclear. Tom turned up his television volume as the reporter's voice filled his kitchen this morning on Channel 7 News. We're here in the prestigious Maple Street neighborhood, where a dispute over patriotic displays has neighbors choosing sides. Karen Mitchell, president of the Maple Street Homeowners Association, says what started as a reasonable request has escalated into harassment. The camera cut to Karen, standing in front of her mansion with an expression of wounded dignity. Simply asked my neighbor to consider removing an unsightly pool that was affecting all our property values. Instead of working with the community, he retaliated by installing this enormous flagpole specifically to intimidate me and my family. Tom's coffee mug hit the counter harder than intended. Karen continued, Don't get me wrong, I support our flag and everything it represents. But this isn't about patriotism. This is about one man using intimidation tactics against a woman who simply tried to maintain neighborhood standards. The size, the placement, the spotlights shining into our bedroom windows at night, it's clearly designed to harass us. The reporter nodded sympathetically. And you believe this flagpole violates community guidelines? Absolutely. No reasonable homeowners association would allow such an aggressive display. We're exploring all legal options to protect our community from this kind of behavior. The camera panned to Tom's flagpole, where Old Glory snapped majestically in the morning breeze 30 feet above the neighborhood. The reporter's voiceover made it sound ominous. The flagpole, installed just days after Mitchell's initial complaint, towers over neighboring homes and is illuminated 24 hours a day. Tom's phone buzzed with a text from his daughter in Seattle. Dad, please tell me that's not you on the news. Another text from his son in Denver. Holy shit, Dad. Mom would be proud. Diana's voice crackled through the phone. Tom, there, painting you as an unstable veteran who's weaponizing patriotism. This is character assassination. So what do? We fight back, but carefully. Karen's mistake was going public now. She has to prove everything she's claiming. And Tom, I don't think she can. By noon, Tom's phone was ringing constantly. Reporters wanting comments, neighbors offering support, veterans groups asking if he needed legal assistance. The story had gone viral. Neighbor wars, pool versus flagpole, and the internet was choosing sides. Most were choosing Tom's. The comments on Channel 7's Facebook page told the story. Lady complained about a pool and got a flagpole instead. That's what I call an upgrade. Intimidation. It's the American flag. If that intimidates you, maybe you're the problem. I'd rather live next to a 100-foot flagpole than a Karen. But Karen wasn't backing down. By Thursday, she'd hired a public relations firm and was making the rounds on local talk radio, spinning her story of being victimized by an aggressive neighbor with military training, who's using psychological warfare tactics. That's when Diana played her ace. Friday morning, Tom received a call from Rebecca Martinez, an investigative reporter with the city's largest newspaper. "Mr. Brennan, I'm working on a story about your neighborhood dispute. I've been digging into Ms. Mitchell's homeowners association claims, and I think you need to see what I found." They met at Diana's office, where Rebecca spread out documents like she was building a legal brief. Karen Mitchell's Maple Street Homeowners Association is a fiction, Rebecca announced. "I've checked county records, state incorporation documents, neighborhood covenants. There's no legal entity by that name." Diana leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Karen created letterhead and a website, but never actually formed a legal organization. The association consists of Karen, her next-door neighbor, Bethany Cooper, and apparently 2 other recent transplants who moved here in the last 6 months." Tom stared at the documents. "So the complaint about my pool, had 0 legal authority," Rebecca confirmed. "But it gets better. I traced the property sales. All 4 founding members of Karen's fake HOA bought their houses through the same real estate development company, Mitchell Properties, LLC. Mitchell Properties, Diana repeated slowly, owned by Karen's husband, Richard Mitchell. He's been quietly buying up properties on Maple Street for 2 years, planning a comprehensive redevelopment of the entire neighborhood. Your house, Mr. Brennan, sits right in the middle of his planned community." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The pool complaint, the fake homeowners association, the escalating harassment, none of it was about aesthetics or property values. It was about forcing Tom to sell. Karen wasn't trying to improve the neighborhood, Tom said. She was trying to clear it. Exactly, and your flagpole just became the most expensive mistake of her husband's real estate career. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed them the aerial photos she'd taken. "That flagpole is visible from the interstate now. Every driver passing through sees a 30-foot American flag flying over what they think is a patriotic neighborhood. Property inquiries from Maple Street have tripled in the past week." Diana was grinning now. "Tom, do you understand what this means? That Karen's plan backfired. More than that, by lying about the homeowners association, making false claims on television, and attempting to force you off your property through harassment. Karen and her husband have opened themselves up to serious legal liability." Rebecca nodded. "Fraud, defamation, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and that's just the civil side. Making false statements to media about ongoing legal disputes could be criminal." Tom looked at his attorney, then at the reporter who'd just handed him a nuclear weapon. "What are you suggesting?" Diana's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm suggesting Karen Mitchell picked a fight with the wrong man. And now it's time to finish it." That evening, Tom sat on his back deck, watching the sun set behind his illuminated flag. His phone had been buzzing all day with interview requests, legal offers, and messages of support from strangers across the country. But the call that mattered most came at 8 p.m. from Karen herself. "We need to talk," Karen said, her voice stripped of its usual artificial sweetness. "I'm listening, not on the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow, somewhere private?" Tom looked up at his flag, snapping proudly in the evening breeze. "Karen, anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my attorney." A long pause. "Tom, please, you don't understand what you're dealing with." "Actually," Tom said, "I think I'm finally starting to—" He hung up and called Diana. "She wants to meet," he told her. "Of course she does. Rebecca's story comes out Sunday morning. Karen's world is about to collapse, and she knows it. So we meet with her." Diana was quiet for a moment. "Tom, 30. Years ago, Karen Mitchell would have gotten away with this. She'd have bullied you off your property, helped her husband flip the neighborhood, and never faced consequences. But she made one crucial mistake. What's that? She messed with a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to F. Karen Mitchell looked like a woman who'd been struck by lightning twice. Her usually perfect blonde hair hung limp around her shoulders. Her designer athleisure wear was wrinkled, and her eyes had the hollow, desperate look of someone watching their world collapse in real time. "Tom," she said, as he approached his front porch, "thank God you're here. We need to talk before what?" Tom interrupted, settling into his porch chair but not inviting her to sit. "Before your fake homeowners association gets exposed? Before the real estate fraud comes to light? Before your husband's development scheme falls apart?" Karen's face went white. "You know, I know everything, Karen. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I can fix this. I can call the reporter, tell her there was a misunderstanding. I can withdraw the complaints, dissolve the association, make all of this go away." Tom studied her for a long moment. 3 days ago, this woman had stood in his yard, threatening him with lawyers and legal action. Now she was begging him to let her escape the consequences of her own choices. "Where's your husband, Karen Richard? He's handling the business side. He doesn't know I'm here. Doesn't know you're here, or doesn't know you've been." Exposed, Karen's silence was answer enough. Tom's phone buzzed. "Diana, right on schedule." "That's my attorney," Tom said. "She's probably wondering why you're trespassing on my property instead of meeting us at her office like we agreed." "Tom, please, you don't understand what's at stake here. Richard has investors, contracts, people who've put millions into this development. If this story comes out, your husband goes to prison for fraud, and you go with him for conspiracy," Tom finished. "Diana explained it all to me. False homeowners associations, harassment campaigns, attempting to force property sales through intimidation. That's federal racketeering." Karen stood abruptly, pacing the small porch like a caged animal. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. Richard has connections, resources. He can make problems disappear." Something cold settled in Tom's chest. Is that a threat? It's a warning. There are easier ways to solve property disputes than legal battles. Tom stood slowly, his 30 years of teaching experience reading the shift in Karen's desperation. This wasn't surrender, this was escalation. "Karen, I think you should leave now. I'm trying to help you," she snapped, her mask finally slipping. "Completely, you stupid, stubborn old man. Do you think that flag makes you untouchable? Do you think playing patriot protects you from people with real power?" "I think," Tom said quietly, "that you just made a very big mistake." His phone was still in his hand. The recording app had been running since Karen started talking. Karen saw his screen and understood immediately. The blood drained from her face as she realized what she'd just said what Tom had just captured. "You can't what? Can't record someone making threats on my own property? Actually, Karen, I can. Pennsylvania's a one-party consent state." Karen lunged for his phone, but Tom was faster. 30 years of breaking up teenage fights had taught him how to anticipate desperate moves. "Get off my property," Tom said, his voice carrying an authority that made Karen step back instinctively. Now, Karen's desperation transformed into something uglier. "This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started." "Actually," said a new voice, "I think it is over." Diana Reeves stepped around the corner of Tom's house, followed by Rebecca Martinez and 2 men Tom didn't recognize, one wearing a police badge, the other carrying a briefcase that screamed federal agent. "Detective Morrison, FBI Agent Chen." Diana said, "I believe you just heard Ms. Mitchell make threats against my client." Karen looked around wildly, realizing she was surrounded. "This is entrapment. This is consequences," Diana replied. "Ms. Mitchell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, making false statements to federal investigators, and criminal threats." "Federal investigators?" Tom asked. Agent Chen stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, we've been investigating Mitchell Properties for 8 months. Wire fraud, mortgage fraud, conspiracy to manipulate property values through intimidation. Your flagpole actually helped us. The media attention brought more victims forward." As Detective Morrison read, Karen, her rights, she looked at Tom with pure hatred. "You destroyed everything. 20 years of building this business, and you destroyed it all over a stupid pool." "No, Karen," Tom said. "You destroyed it the moment you decided to lie, cheat, and steal, instead of just asking nicely." After the police cars left, Tom sat, on his porch steps with Diana, Rebecca, and Agent Chen, trying to process what had just happened. "How many victims?" Tom asked. 43 properties across 3 counties, Agent Chen replied. The Mitchells would identify target neighborhoods, plant fake homeowners associations, harass longtime residents into selling below market value, then flip the properties to developers. Classic gentrification scheme with a modern twist. Rebecca was taking notes furiously. "Mr. Brennan, how does it feel to know your flagpole brought down a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise?" Tom looked up at his flag, snapping proudly in the afternoon breeze. "Honestly, I think Sarah would have laughed herself silly." "Sarah?" Rebecca asked. "My late wife. She always said bullies only understand one language consequences." Tom smiled. She would have loved seeing Karen get arrested on her front porch. Diana pulled out her phone. "Tom, I just got a call from the district attorney. They want to offer you a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Richard Mitchell is willing to plead guilty to all charges and surrender all disputed properties in exchange for reduced sentences. The DA wants to know if you'd be willing to testify at their sentencing hearing." Tom didn't need to think about it. "When do we start?" But as the group dispersed and Tom was left alone with his thoughts, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A black SUV parked at the end of the street, too far away to see clearly, but close enough to feel watched. Richard Mitchell might be willing to plead guilty. But Karen's threats echoed in Tom's mind. Richard has connections, resources. He can make problems disappear. Tom pulled out his phone and called the one person who'd understand what he was thinking. "Diana, it's Tom. That SUV at the end of my street, is that one of yours?" A pause. "What SUV?" "Black Escalade, tinted windows, been sitting there since the arrest." "Tom, get inside now. Lock your doors. I'm calling Agent Chen." As Tom headed for his front door, he glanced back at his flagpole one more time. The flag was still flying proudly, still catching the light, still visible for miles. But for the first time since this whole thing started, Tom wondered if his symbol of freedom might have made him a target for something far more dangerous than neighborhood politics. The SUV's engine started, and Tom watched it drive slowly past his house. In the passenger seat, he caught a glimpse of a man in an expensive suit talking on a phone, his eyes locked on Tom's front door. Richard Mitchell might be under arrest, but his connections were still very much in play. And Tom Brennan, small-town shop teacher turned accidental hero, was about to discover that some battles don't end with arrests and plea bargains. Sometimes they end with the kind of consequences that make people disappear. Tom double-locked his front door and called his kids. If the Mitchell organization was as connected as Karen claimed, his victory celebration might be premature. The flag still flew proudly outside his window, but now it felt less like a symbol of triumph and more like a beacon marking his position for anyone who wanted to find him. The war wasn't over. It was just getting started. The first sign that Tom's victory had painted a target on his back came at 3:17 a.m., when his security system installed by Agent Chen's recommendation detected movement in his backyard. Tom grabbed the baseball bat he'd kept under his bed. Since Sarah's diagnosis and moved to his kitchen window, 3 figures in dark clothing were examining his flagpole's foundation with flashlights. Their movements professional and coordinated, not vandals, not burglars, saboteurs. Tom's hand found his phone, speed-dialing Agent Chen while keeping his eyes on the intruders. "Chen, it's Tom Brennan. 3 men in my backyard. Looks like they're trying to damage my flagpole. Stay inside. Do not engage." Units are en route. But as Tom watched, one of the figures produced what looked like a small explosive device. These weren't petty criminals trying to send a message. They were professionals trying to eliminate evidence. The flagpole that had brought down the Mitchell empire was about to become a casualty of war. Tom made a decision that would have made Sarah proud and terrified at the same time. He unlocked his back door and stepped onto his deck. "Gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades managing unruly teenagers. "I suggest you step away from my property." The 3 figures froze, then slowly turned toward him. In the LED spotlights illuminating his flag, Tom could see their faces clearly, now professional, cold, and very annoyed at being interrupted. "Mr. Brennan," said the man holding the device, his voice carrying a faint accent Tom couldn't place. "You should go back inside." "Funny thing about being an American citizen on American soil," Tom replied, taking a step forward. "I don't take orders from men sneaking around my yard in the middle of the night." The man smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. "Mr. Brennan, you've caused considerable trouble for some very important people. This is your opportunity to make things easier for everyone. By letting you destroy my flagpole, by understanding that some victories come with prices you may not be prepared to pay." Tom heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. The man heard them too. His smile faded. "This is your last warning, Mr. Brennan. Some battles are bigger than small-town heroes." "Maybe," Tom replied, "but this is America. We don't back down to foreign threats on our own soil." Something flickered in the man's eyes. Surprise, maybe even respect. Foreign threats. Russian accent, FSB training, professional demolition equipment, Tom said. "My late wife was a linguist. I picked up a few things." The sirens were very close now. The man made a quick decision, signaling his team to withdraw. But before disappearing into the darkness, he called back, "The Mitchell organization has contracts that extend far beyond real estate, Mr. Brennan. This flagpole has disrupted arrangements that took years to establish." And then they were gone, melting into the night like shadows. Agent Chen arrived with a full tactical response team 6 minutes later, finding Tom sitting on his back deck, still holding his baseball bat. "What the hell happened here?" Chen demanded. "Russian intelligence operatives trying to sabotage my flagpole," Tom replied, then paused. "You know, a month ago, that would have sounded crazy even to me." "Russian intelligence." Chen's expression shifted from concern to something much more serious. "Tom, what exactly did they say?" Tom recounted the conversation, while Chen's team processed the scene. What they found was sobering: military-grade explosive devices, professional surveillance equipment, and communication gear that definitely wasn't available at the local electronics store. Agent Chen called one of the technicians. "You need to see this." They gathered around a small device that had been attached to Tom's flagpole. "High-frequency scanner," the technician explained. "Designed to intercept and record electronic communications within a half-mile radius. This isn't about vandalism, it's about intelligence gathering." Chen's phone buzzed. She answered, listened, then hung up with a grim expression. "Tom, we need to get you somewhere safe. Now." "Why? What's happening?" Richard Mitchell wasn't just running a real estate scam. According to his financial records, Mitchell Properties was laundering money for a Russian investment group with ties to organized crime and foreign intelligence. Your flagpole didn't just expose fraud, it exposed an enemy operation on American soil. Tom looked up at his flag, still flying proudly despite the night's events. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying you've accidentally become one of the most important witnesses in a national security investigation, and people are willing to kill to keep you quiet." The next 72 hours passed in a blur of safe houses, federal agents, and briefings that made Tom's head spin. The Mitchell organization wasn't just stealing neighborhoods, they were using real estate transactions to move money for foreign operatives, providing safe houses for intelligence assets, and creating a network of properties that could be used for operations against American targets. Tom's simple act of patriotic defiance had unraveled a conspiracy that reached from small-town Pennsylvania to the highest levels of international espionage. But the most shocking revelation came on Thursday morning when Agent Chen walked into Tom's temporary quarters with a file that changed everything. "Tom, we've been tracking the money trail. The Russian investment group backing Mitchell Properties, they've been operating in the United States for 15 years, systematically buying up properties in small towns across America. For what? Sleeper cells, safe houses, strategic positioning for future operations." Chen opened the file. "Tom, they've been targeting communities with specific demographics, high veteran populations, strong patriotic sentiment, local leadership that could be compromised or eliminated." Tom felt the blood drain from his face. Maple Street. Maple Street fits the pattern perfectly. High-value properties, long-time residents with military backgrounds, strategic location near major transportation hubs. Chen pulled out a map. If they'd succeeded in clearing your neighborhood, they'd have controlled a perfect staging area for operations against 3 major cities, and my flagpole, your flagpole, made it impossible for them to operate covertly. Hard to run a secret intelligence operation when there's a 30-foot American flag drawing attention to the neighborhood. Tom sat down heavily. Jesus, all I wanted to do was annoy Karen Mitchell. Tom, you did more than annoy her. You may have prevented a major attack on American soil. That evening, Tom was allowed to return home under heavy security protection. As his escort vehicle turned onto Maple Street, he saw something that made his heart swell with pride and terror in equal measure. Every house on the block now flew an American flag. Not small, discrete flags, full-size flags on regulation poles, illuminated by professional lighting, visible for miles in every direction. Frank Delacroix met him at his front door, grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. Tom, Frank said, you started something. The whole neighborhood knows what really happened here. We're not just flying flags, we're sending a message. What message? That this is America, and Americans don't back down. As Tom looked down Maple Street, lined with flags snapping proudly in the evening breeze, he realized that Karen Mitchell's plan to clear the neighborhood had backfired more spectacularly than anyone could have imagined. Instead of driving out the patriots, she'd created an army of them. But as Tom settled into his house, still under federal protection, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was still coming. The Russian operative's words echoed in his mind. Some battles are bigger than small-town heroes. Maybe so, but Tom Brennan had learned something important over the past month. Sometimes small-town heroes are exactly what big battles need. His flagpole stood tall against the night sky, illuminated like a beacon of defiance. Tomorrow, he would testify before a federal grand jury about the Mitchell conspiracy. Next week, he would face congressional hearings about foreign infiltration of American communities. But tonight, Tom Brennan sat on his back deck, looking up at the flag his late wife would have loved, and prepared for whatever came next. The war for Maple Street was over. The war for America was just beginning. And Tom had a feeling that a retired shop teacher from small-town Pennsylvania was about to become a very important weapon in that fight. 6 months later, Tom Brennan stood before the Senate Intelligence Committee in a room that had witnessed the testimony of presidents and spies, generals and whistleblowers. The C-SPAN cameras captured every word as he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth about how a neighborhood pool dispute had uncovered the largest foreign intelligence operation on American soil since the Cold War. But the real story, it wasn't happening in Washington. It was happening on Maple Street, where Karen Mitchell released on house arrest, pending her cooperation with federal prosecutors, sat in her million-dollar mansion. Watching her former neighbors prepare for war, Tom's testimony had made international headlines. Pennsylvania teacher exposes Russian sleeper cell network. The Mitchell Properties investigation had led to arrests in 17 states. Homeowners Association complaint had accidentally exposed Operation Patriot's Resta, 15-year Russian, programmed to establish staging areas in American communities with high veteran populations. Towns where a sudden influx of foreign money and suspicious new residents might go unnoticed, where local patriotism could be weaponized as a cover for anti-American activities. Tom's flagpole hadn't just annoyed a neighbor, it had blown the cover on a network designed to destroy America from within. Now, 6 months after that first complaint about his pool, Tom was coming home to face the consequences of accidentally becoming America's most famous accidental patriot. The motorcade turned onto Maple Street at sunset. Tom, riding in the passenger seat of Agent Chun's unmarked SUV, what he saw took his breath away. Every house on the street now flew multiple American flags, POW flags, state flags, military, branch flags. The Hendersons had installed a 20-foot pole with a Marine Corps flag beneath their American colors. Mrs. Chen had added a Korean War veterans flag to honor her late husband. Frank Delacroix flew a flag that simply read, "Never Forget," in bold letters. But it wasn't just flags. The entire neighborhood had transformed into something that looked like a patriotic fortress. Security cameras on every porch, motion sensor floodlights illuminating every yard, and what appeared to be a neighborhood watch system that would make the Secret Service jealous. "Tom," Agent Chen said softly, "I think your neighbors missed you." As their vehicle approached Tom's house, he saw the crowd gathered on his front lawn, not just neighbors veterans from 3 counties, reporters, families with children holding small American flags. and what appeared to be a delegation from the local VFW post. At the center of it all stood his flagpole, still 30 feet tall, still perfectly maintained, still flying Old Glory with the kind of pride that made grown men salute involuntarily. But something was different. At the base of the pole, someone had installed a granite plaque. Tom couldn't read it from the car, but he could see flowers and small American flags placed around it like a memorial. "What's the plaque?" Tom asked. Agent Chen smiled. "Why don't you go see for yourself?" The crowd parted as Tom approached his flagpole, their applause building into something that sounded like thunder. But Tom's attention was fixed on the granite marker at the base of his pole. The inscription read, "In memory of Sarah Elizabeth Brennan, beloved wife, patriot, and inspiration. Bullies only understand one language, consequences, her husband's." Flagpole stands as proof that ordinary Americans can do extraordinary things. Tom's vision blurred. He hadn't told anyone about Sarah's words, hadn't shared her philosophy about standing up to bullies. Someone had researched his story, interviewed his neighbors, maybe even talked to his kids. Someone had made sure Sarah was part of this moment. Tom, Frank Delacroix, stepped forward, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Welcome home, neighbor." The applause started again, but Tom held up his hand. "I need to say something," he called out, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded. "High school classrooms for 3 decades. 6 months ago, I put up this flagpole because I was angry at a neighbor who thought she could push me around. I had no idea what I was starting." The crowd quieted. "But I learned something these past months. When Americans stand up to bullies, whether they're entitled neighbors or foreign enemies, amazing things happen. Not because we're looking for fights, but because some things are worth fighting for." Tom looked up at his flag, snapping proudly. "In the evening breeze, this flag doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us. It represents the idea that ordinary people can stand up to extraordinary evil and win. That a retired shop teacher with a swimming pool complaint can accidentally help save his country." The crowd was completely silent now, but mostly it represents the woman whose name is on that plaque. Sarah Brennan believed that Americans don't back down from bullies. We don't apologize for loving our country, and we don't let anyone foreign or domestic threaten what we've built here. Tom's voice grew stronger. "Karen Mitchell thought she could intimidate me into selling my home. The Russians thought they could use our neighborhoods as bases for attacking our country. They were both wrong, and they were wrong for the same reason. They underestimated what happens when you mess with Americans on American soil." The applause started smaller, few people clapping, then building into something that sounded like a celebration of everything the flag represented. As the crowd began to disperse, Tom noticed a figure standing apart from the celebration. Karen Mitchell, wearing an ankle monitor and an expression of absolute defeat, watching from her front porch as her former neighbors celebrated the man who had destroyed her life. Tom walked over to her. "Karen," he said simply. "Tom," her voice was barely a whisper. "I watched your testimony on C-SPAN. I never knew. I never understood what Richard was really doing." "You knew enough," Karen nodded. "I did. I knew we were hurting people, forcing them from their homes. I just didn't care. It represented everything I thought was wrong with this neighborhood stuff. Backward-looking people who wouldn't embrace progress. And now, everything I could have been if I'd chosen to build something instead of tear it down." Tom studied her for a moment. "Karen, what are you going to do when this is all over?" "Prison, probably. 3 to 5 years, if I keep cooperating with the FBI," she managed a weak smile. "Richard got 15 years. Turns out knowingly working with foreign intelligence carries heavier penalties than I realized. After prison," Karen was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. Start over, I guess. Try to become the kind of person who builds communities instead of destroying them." Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out a small American flag, pinned the kind they'd been handing out at the celebration. "When you get out," he said, offering her the pin, "remember that America is the kind of country that gives people second chances, even people who don't deserve them." Karen took the pin with trembling hands. "Why are you being kind to me?" "Because Sarah would have wanted me to. She believed that Americans help other Americans become better, even when they don't deserve it." As Tom walked back to his house, he found Agent Chen waiting on his front porch. "How does it feel to be home?" she asked. Tom looked around Maple Street. now lined with flags and filled with neighbors who had become friends, protectors, and fellow patriots. "Like I finally understand what Sarah meant about consequences," he said. Karen thought, bullying. Me would get her what she wanted. Instead, it got her arrested, her husband imprisoned, and a Russian intelligence network exposed. And you got a 30-foot flagpole and a place in American history. Tom smiled. "I got something better than that. I got proof that ordinary Americans can still do extraordinary things when they decide to stand up instead of back down." Above them, Old Glory snapped in the evening breeze, illuminated by LED spotlights that would burn all night, every night, for the next 25 years. The pool was gone. Karen's threats were over. The Russian operation was finished, but the flag still flew and would keep flying. As a reminder that sometimes the most important battles begin with the smallest. Acts of defiance, Tom Brennan had started this fight. To annoy a neighbor, he'd ended it by helping save his country. And every time the wind caught that flag and sent it streaming against the Pennsylvania sky, it told the same story. Americans don't back down. Americans don't give up. And Americans definitely don't let foreign enemies use their neighborhoods as launching pads for attacks on freedom. The war for Maple Street was over. America had won, and it all started with a man who refused to let a bully tell him what to do with his own backyard. EPI loads you years later, dedicated to ordinary Americans who do extraordinary things. The park receives over 50,000 visitors annually, including delegations from NATO countries studying community-based counterintelligence operations. Karen Mitchell was released after serving 18 months in federal prison. She now runs a nonprofit organization helping communities identify and resist foreign influence operations. She still lives on Maple Street in a modest apartment above Frank Delacroix's garage and flies a small American flag outside her window